The Pelicans are in a fight for the 4th seed and home court advantage in the first round, but do they actually need it? I'll tell you if hosting a Game 7 is actually important or not. All that and more in a Tuesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with you on this Tuesday, a game day for the New Orleans Pelicans. They have a tough test at home over these next couple of games. We'll talk about that coming up in the second segment of today's show. I want to talk about Herb Jones in the third as well, but I want to start with home court advantage. And do the Pelicans actually need it? How much of an advantage truly is there in the NBA? I've got some stuff for you on all of this. But of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about this Pelicans team in the stretch run of the season. We're going to have a ton of stuff for you, some bonus things, especially this week. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join almost 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, where we do often live shows. Maybe we'll do one of those this weekend as well. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. So let's get into, become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans if you don't already. I put out a call for questions. A lot of y'all responded. It was great. We're kind of building the show out around some of those right now. Some of you said things we've already covered. Make sure you're listening Monday through Friday. You won't miss a thing with this team. I've got you covered, I promise. So let's start with home court advantage. Do the Pelicans truly need this? How important is it in the modern NBA? Look, home court matters some. Absolutely. But I don't think it's necessarily the most important thing in terms of success in the playoffs, especially in a series. A one-game play-in setting, things are different. But in a 7-game series, the most important thing to me is matchups. How you kind of cross-match with the opponent, your strengths versus their strengths, your strengths versus their disadvantages, things like that. Matchup matters, I think, more than anything. Look at the Miami Heat in the NBA Finals this past year. They didn't win a game at home against Denver, right? It was just a bad matchup for them. Jokic was playing just otherworldly basketball. He still is. And there's just nothing they could do. Even being at home in Miami wasn't going to do anything, right? Look at the Pelicans a couple of years ago against Portland. They were the 6 seed. Portland was the 3 seed. They swept them while starting on the road. So when we're looking at them in a series against the Los Angeles Clippers, and look, that's likely who they're going to end up playing in the first round. By the time I'm recording this, the Clippers play this evening on Monday night, but I'm recording this before that game. The Pelicans being just a half game back, if the Clippers lose to the Pacers, the Pelicans could be in sole possession or tied for 4th, but they have the tiebreaker over the Clippers. So they could be having home court advantage when I'm done recording this sort of thing right now, as they sit only a half game back of the Clippers here. But the Pelicans went on the road, won those first 2 games, then finished it off at home in the next 2 against the Portland Trailblazers, because Jusuf Nurkic in that matchup was just like at a huge disadvantage against Anthony Davis. You also had Drew Holiday, who was a great matchup against Damian Lillard and completely limited him in that series, right? So when you're looking at a series against the Clippers, again, who they're likely going to play in the first round, most important thing is how they match up against that Clippers team. And I think New Orleans matches up well, not perfectly, but they do match up well, especially because of the center position, something that I've previously talked about. If you're an everydayer, you know that I think Zubac is a huge disadvantage for the Clippers in this series, potential series, against the New Orleans Pelicans. So that's the most important thing to me, is the matchups here and how you can leverage those to win a playoff series, more so than who's playing at home. Pelicans have a winning record on the road. More on that in a minute here. But let's not pretend that home court advantage doesn't matter at all. Studies have shown that home court advantage does exist even if it's minor. Teams in the playoffs tend to score more points at home than they do on the road. Now, when you look at this a little bit, the better team is the higher seed playing a worse team than them. So if it does go 7 games, the better team has home court, likely going to win that one because they're a better team in theory. So this is somewhat skewed, right? But there's also things like more calls go your way, that referees are in fact, at least subconsciously and not to an extreme degree, influenced by the crowd ever so slightly. But there's also things like being slightly better rested. Sleeping in your own bed versus sleeping in a hotel room, I think can go a long way with those sorts of things. And if you come out and win those 2 home games, you really put the opponent on the back foot. Now they're down 0-2 and the pressure is on them and you're kind of playing with house money a little bit at this point in time. Plus, and maybe this is the most important thing, there's a placebo effect on the players, right? If players think home court advantage matters, if they think that they play better at home, they're going to play better at home. Right? It's kind of the power of belief and those sorts of things here, right? It's a placebo effect, but if it makes them play better, there's something to that. So if the players think home court advantage matters, they're likely going to play better at home. That means you're more likely to win or have a better game. This stuff then does matter. But here's the secret when it comes to the Pelicans. They're a good road team. This team is 24-14, 10 games above 500 on the road. They shoot better on the road than at home. If you look at their splits, and I don't have them up in front of me, that's a significant thing. So if you can be slightly better at home but still maintain a lot of what you do on the road well, and maybe it goes down in there because we're talking about home court advantage, so maybe it's not as much of a thing for the Pelicans, but if it can then just neutralize home court advantage for the opponent, that seems to be pretty big to me. And so I think that can put the Pelicans in a really good spot when it comes to what the playoff series. So whether they're the 4 seed, the 5 seed, anything like that, like I'm less worried about them in that sort of standing than they would be otherwise. Let me pull the numbers here. They shoot 36.9% from 3 at home, 39% on the road, so about a 2% increase, right? Like that's a very good number right there. That's one of the more important things. They get about the same number. They get a slight bit more of free throw attempts at home than on the road. Rebounds are a little bit better on the road, to the point where it's probably not statistically relevant. The big thing is the shooting percentage there. But they get about a steal more per game, about a block more per game. They turn the ball over slightly less. Those things could come into play. So yeah, home court advantage matters, but I don't think it's as big of a difference maker for this Pelicans team as maybe it would be otherwise, given the level of road play that they have. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Is it a big deal if they're the 4th seed versus the 5th seed? Look, I'd like them to be the 4th seed, certainly. That's only a good thing, right? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Coming up, tough upcoming schedule for the Pelicans. What's considered a success over the next 5-6 games when you look at the upcoming schedule? We'll talk about that. We'll break it down and kind of give this team some benchmarks and what it says about the playoffs, depending on how they do. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about PrizePicks because PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you against the numbers. You pick more or less on the stat projection for 2 to 6 players, and then you watch the winnings roll in. And right now, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Red squares, green squares give you different payouts, and now you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is really simple to play, and you can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's up to $100 on a first-time deposit match when you go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know, whether it's the statistics, whether it's looking at matchups, whether it's trade rumors, everything. We cover it all here. Become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And join almost 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well as we gear up for the playoffs, because the Pelicans are going to be in that mix, maybe having home court advantage, maybe even a little bit higher. Could they get the 3 seed? We'll probably look at all of that on Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And by the way, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the upcoming schedule for the Pelicans starting tonight with a game against the Oklahoma City Thunder is tough. It's the Thunder, it's the Bucks, then Boston, right? Then they've got Phoenix, who are winning when I'm recording this, then Orlando, who just beat New Orleans, and then they wrap up this 6-game homestand against the San Antonio Spurs. And while the Spurs are bad, the Spurs are a very bad team. Victor Wembanyama is like playing otherworldly basketball and looks extremely good. And who knows what that could mean, right? Length tends to sometimes be a problem. Size tends to somewhat be a problem for the Pelicans. Wembanyama against Zion Williamson potentially could be a problem, and they're not going to have Brandon Ingram during this stretch. So we've got to keep that in mind, right? We've got to keep in mind that they don't have Brandon Ingram, so there's only so much you can read into this. So it's a tough upcoming schedule. And I do think, though, it could kind of tell us who the Pels really are and what they can do in the playoffs, with the asterisks of being like, okay, well, you've no Brandon Ingram to kind of judge that off of. But for the most part, 5 of these 6 games, and it's the first 5, so we can really look at the just next 5 games, are really good teams. Oklahoma City has been at the top of the standings in the West for the entirety of the league. Milwaukee is number 2 despite a lot of turnover, and Giannis is just Giannis, right? The Boston Celtics have already clinched the number 1 seed in the East before literally any other team has clinched even a regular playoff spot. That's how dominant they've been in the regular season. Phoenix has been up and down, certainly, but they're 7-3 going into Monday in their past 10 games, and they're beating the San Antonio Spurs when I'm recording this. Not by much, though. Tells you about the Spurs a little bit, doesn't it? So these are good teams. We've seen them struggle against some of the top teams. They also have a good record, for the most part, against top teams too. But now everyone's kind of peaking and should be playing their best basketball. So it's time for the Pelicans to kind of show us who they are. If we're looking at 6 games here, and let's count the Spurs game as a win. So let's remove it. Let's just look at 5 games, right? 3-2, I think, is considered a massive success, given no Brandon Ingram here. And look, as I said in yesterday's show, this team is not better without Brandon Ingram, like at all. They might win some games, they might play well, but they are not a better overall team without Brandon Ingram in the lineup for New Orleans. Let's keep that in mind. So 3-2, going essentially, if you count a win over the Spurs, 4-2 over the 6-game homestand, that's a massive success here. 3-3, I think, would still be good. So here now you're looking at going 2-3 against these 5 best teams. A lot of people are then going to say the Pelicans can't do it against top teams. That might be the case. They're still going to get into the postseason and be a tough out, but if they don't do particularly well here, yeah, it probably should temper a little bit of our expectations for the postseason, thinking they can make conference finals or the NBA finals. As I've said this season, I don't see them doing that even when they're fully healthy right now. Doesn't mean they won't be competitive. And a lot of it depends on matchup, like we just talked about in the last segment here. But with Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, they can take you far here. With CJ being a very good third wheel, Trey Murphy emerging, Herb Jones being Herb Jones, and more on Herb Jones in a moment here. This team can still do some damage, and I don't think even losing in the first round is necessarily one of those things where we look at it and call it a disappointment. But if this team somehow goes 4-2, 5-1, I'm not even going to say 5-0 during these against these five teams here, but if you can go 4-1, you're looking at that and going, oh, okay. You've got to look at the season as a whole, but you also do need to segment it out a little bit. So the Pelicans' record against top teams earlier on in the year doesn't matter nearly as much as how they're playing now. They blew a lot of double-digit leads earlier on in the year. They haven't been doing that. So this isn't the same team, right? Just as you're not the same person you were 5-10 years ago, right? You grow and you change as a human. The team can grow and change as the course of the season goes on. I've long said that expectations need to be something that fluctuates and adjusts with what is in front of you. It might start out real high and then there's an injury, so you need to change them. Or you might start them out low, then the team plays better and you raise those expectations up. It's not a static mark. So looking at it, this is, I think, is going to give us our benchmark for the playoffs. The team can still be competitive in all of this without Brandon Ingram. They're not better, though. So 3-2 is a really good sign that this team is really, truly ready for the postseason and what that entails here. Less than that, maybe it means we need to dial him back. But again, you don't have Brandon Ingram. So it's tough to truly make sense of it. And that's why we need to maybe wait and watch some of these games before we figure out exactly what to try and take away from it, right? We're trying to prognosticate here. That's always not the easiest thing to do. And one of the things that I've learned doing this for 10 plus years and doing almost 2,000 episodes of this show is what's happened in the past is not necessarily a predictor of the future whatsoever when it comes to things. So we're going to watch these games with a lot of interest here to see how the Pelicans can match up. Are the Oklahoma City Thunder a good or a bad matchup for New Orleans here, right? That's a team they could play in the second round of the playoffs. What about the Phoenix Suns? Depending on what Phoenix does, that's a future playoff opponent potentially as well. Do they match up well? Do they not, right? It's been hit or miss with some of that. It's been hit or miss with the Oklahoma City Thunder as well for New Orleans. So this stretch, I'm glad they're at home. And you've got a day of rest in between. There's no back-to-backs or anything like that. But this is, I don't want to say the make or break part of the season for the Pelicans because it's not. After this, they have a tough-ish 4-game road trip before finishing off at home against the Lakers. And I said at the beginning of the year, especially if you're an everyday, final 15 games or so for the Pelicans are kind of brutal. Let's see what they're made of. I'm excited for this sort of thing. These games really matter, and it's a good litmus test, minus Brandon Ingram being out, for New Orleans and what head coach Willie Green is capable of concocting. And as we talked about in yesterday's show, I think he's done a really good job coaching recently and getting those 2 wins without Brandon Ingram, even if one was against the, lowly, pitiful Detroit Pistons. That win over Miami was good. That win over Miami was very, very good, especially after what Jimmy Butler said and seeing this team in the right headspace and making these right type of adjustments, particularly in game, I'd like to see. So I'm going to be really curious to see what this team does, and I'm excited about it, and I hope you are as well. And look, we're going to be talking about it here on Locked On Pelicans, making sense of what we see and seeing what that means going forward for this team. One thing we know going forward, Herb Jones needs to be on the all-defensive first team. As simple as that. And the Pelicans have started the campaign. So that's all coming up here. More Herb Jones coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. Those things can really linger, You can dwell on them. They can turn into bigger things. You don't want that happening. When you have some of those feelings, they're like a check engine light, right? Meaning something's wrong and you better get it checked out before your engine explodes here. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week, and we're going to talk about it in the next segment here. And if Herb Jones is going to be on the all-defensive first team, he needs to get some love, some credit for Defensive Player of the Year too, particularly with how good this Pelicans defense has been. And it's really led by the engine that is Herb Jones on the defensive side of the ball. I think he'll make all defensive first team. I'll give you a spoiler alert for the next segment. I don't think he's going to get much love. He'll get some votes for Defensive Player of the Year, and I think that's wrong. And it's going to annoy me, and we'll talk about it here on Locked On Pelicans. So therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Join almost 10,000 of y'all on YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And don't forget about the 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. There's an app. That's awesome. All right, let's talk Herb Jones here, because you know who's talking about Herb Jones? Literally everybody, because he was trending on Twitter yesterday. How awesome is that? Seeing him out there really just kind of being a name that people care about, that's really exciting to see. We love when the homegrown talent here, and he's homegrown here in New Orleans as an NBA player, gets the love and shine and deserves, right? Because you know what? Herb Jones is never going to promote himself for this sort of thing. So other people, Antonio Daniels on the broadcast constantly says it. We talk about it here. You're probably saying this yourself. We'll do it for him. And he should be on the all-defensive first team, without a doubt. Without a doubt. The Pelicans are really promoting him too, and I think that's why he was trending. This was clearly a good move by their social media team, by just everyone involved with this decision. Great job overall. I loved it. I went to the website. You can look at it yourself. They lay out a fantastic case for Herb Jones. We can get into the numbers. Go to the website that they put out there and look at it. It's real as simple as that, right? One thing that I think is most important here, and it helps that the Pelicans are good, is dude passes the eye test, right? You just watch him lock guys down. He has a number of highlights that are pretty insane. The most recent one being the block on that Paul George three-point attempt. Paul George was like, what the heck, right? The quotes from NBA players being like, that dude is a menace. He held... And this is, I think, the biggest thing, right? That respect from your peers, I think, is really important. And they give him tons of respect because they have bad games against him. Tyrese Halliburton did nothing with Herb Jones on him. Tyrese Halliburton was going to be in the running for most improved player, I think. He's looked that good, like breakout player this season. Tyrese Maxey didn't do anything against Herb Jones. Paul George had his lunch taken from Herb Jones there. Herb has also shut down Kawhi Leonard. He held Luka Doncic to what might be Luka's worst game ever in the NBA, and Luka is one of the 3 people, in my opinion, in the running for the MVP conversation. He's been that good. That good. And this Pelicans defense is good too. Right? They have the 5th best defense when I'm recording the show right now. Herb Jones is the engine from that. And when you watch him play, it just jumps off the screen at you. You see what he's doing. And more people have been paying attention to the Pelicans recently because they're winning games. Winning puts more eyes on you, and that's going to help you get votes for the all-defensive team. It's not a crime that he hasn't made it the past 2 years. It would be a crime if he doesn't make it this year. And not even second team. First team, right? That's kind of the big thing here. But the Pelicans are winning. People are really paying attention to him now. You can't ignore him. And kind of the word is out. And I love that the Pelicans are promoting him with the website, with the logo that's just purely a lock. That's awesome. Everything about this, I think, is really cool. Promote your guys. Have your players' backs, and this team definitely does that. That's something that other players will take note of, not just on this team, but around the league as a whole, and I think it's a really good look for the franchise to be doing that. So without a doubt, he should be on the all-defensive first team. I don't think he's going to win Defensive Player of the Year. I just mentioned it when we were talking about better help. I don't think he's going to win Defensive Player of the Year. I don't even think he's going to finish in the top 2 or 3 of Defensive Player of the Year. It's going to be like Rudy Gobert, and then it'll probably go to Victor Wembanyama. Big men tend to, not always, but more often than not, get that award for the rim protection, the blocks, things like that. I would not be shocked if Herb Jones gets a lot of 3rd place, 4th place, 5th place votes and comes in getting some of those numbers, particularly because now this is like 2-3 seasons that the Pelicans defense has been ranked highly, 2 at the very least, and I think that's important, that it shows there's some consistency there with things. So I do find that to be a very important factor for what he's going to get with the postseason awards. I think when you're looking at some of the postseason awards, that's going to be the guy that can really do it for New Orleans. I think he'll be on one of the all-defensive teams, should be first team. And I think he'll get some votes for Defensive Player of the Year too. And maybe we'll see a couple of other things here for players. Maybe Zion starts to get some love at the end of the regular season here, but Herb is in a good spot, and I love that people are promoting him. To see him trending on Twitter definitely shows that this is going in the right direction. Awesome to see. Fantastic. That's exactly what we want. Great job by the Pelicans. Great job by you and everyone else for screaming it as well. I think you're going to see Herb Jones collecting some honors at the end of the year. Do you think he should be in the running for Defensive Player of the Year, or is the all-defensive first team or second team enough? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I appreciate you all so much for listening. Enjoy the game tonight in the Smoothie King Center. I will be there. Maybe the Pelicans are going to be the 4th seed. We'll find out. It's going to be a fun one, a good test for New Orleans, and we'll see what this team's truly made of. And of course, we'll be breaking it down in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLAJake on Twitter, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.